The Armada disaster: how England outsmarted Spain. What happens when a seasick admiral is put in charge of the greatest fleet the world has ever seen? How did a queen with no navy of her own turn pirates into national heroes? Why did Spain's so-called Invincible Armada end up wrecked on the rocks of Ireland instead of marching triumphantly into London? Stay with me, because this is the full, dramatic, and hilarious saga of the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Once upon a time, the mid-1500s, Spain and England were practically honeymooning. Philip II of Spain married Mary Tudor, Queen of England, and together they cozied up against their mutual enemy, France. But alas, Mary died in 1558, and her half-sister Elizabeth, Protestant, sharp-witted, and allergic to papal authority, took the throne. Cue the awkward breakfast conversation. Spain was Catholic, Elizabeth was Protestant, and suddenly the alliance looked less like a marriage and more like a messy divorce. Henry VIII had already told the Pope to shove off decades earlier, so the religious tension was baked into the Tudor cake. Philip, ever the devout Catholic, began plotting ways to restore Rome's supremacy in England. Meanwhile, Elizabeth gleefully encouraged her sea dogs, privateers like Francis Drake, to raid Spanish treasure fleets. Think of it as Elizabeth running a state-sponsored pirate fan club. The real flashpoint? Flanders. Spain controlled it, but Dutch Protestants weren't having it. In 1572, they revolted, with England cheering them on from the sidelines. Enter Alessandro Farnese, Duke of Parma, Philip's nephew and a military genius. By 1578, Parma had contained the rebellion with a mix of clever sieges, diplomacy, and sheer grit. But he realized one thing: as long as England kept funneling money and troops to the Dutch, Spain would never truly win. So he whispered to Uncle Philip, "Cut off England, and Flanders is ours." Meanwhile, Elizabeth was busy trolling Philip. In 1580, Philip demanded punishment for Francis Drake's piratical antics. Elizabeth responded by knighting him. Imagine Philip's face. You knighted the pirate? It was the 16th century equivalent of giving your enemy's hacker a medal. Spain retaliated by supporting uprisings in Ireland, landing volunteers at Smerwick. They were crushed, but the message was clear: war was coming. In 1582, Spain and England clashed directly at Villafranca do Campo during the War of the Portuguese Succession. Spain had annexed Portugal, but a pretender named Antonio, backed by England and France, tried to snatch it back. Spain crushed Antonio's fleet, including English allies. Philip strutted away from the victory thinking, maybe it's time to deal with England once and for all. He ordered his top admiral, Don Álvaro de Bazan, Marquis of Santa Cruz, to draft invasion plans. Spoiler, they were ambitious. Santa Cruz envisioned a massive armada linking up with Parma's forces in Flanders, then marching straight into London. Parma estimated they'd conquer the capital in 8 days. 8. Clearly, Parma had never tried to get through London traffic. Loving the story? Be generous, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss the next chapter. Elizabeth wasn't sitting idle. In 1585, she signed the Treaty of Nonsuch, pledging money and 7,000 troops to the Dutch rebels. Philip fumed. Then in 1586, Elizabeth's spymaster Sir Francis Walsingham uncovered the Babington Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth's response? Off with Mary's head in 1587. Philip saw this as the final straw. He accelerated invasion plans and Santa Cruz began assembling the Great Armada in Lisbon. But Francis Drake wasn't done trolling Spain. In April 1587, he pulled off the legendary Singing of the King of Spain's beard. He stormed Cadiz harbor, burned 27 ships, and delayed the Armada by a year. Supplies rotted, soldiers got sick, and Philip's grand plan started looking less like a juggernaut and more like a logistical nightmare. Then fate twisted the knife. Santa Cruz died in 1588. Philip appointed Don Alonso Pérez de Guzmán, Duke of Medina Sidonia, as commander. Problem: Medina Sidonia was a brilliant land general, but hopeless at sea. He even wrote to Philip, "I get seasick." Imagine being handed the world's largest naval operation and replying, "Thanks, but boats make me queasy." Despite his seasickness, Medina Sidonia took the job. He revised the invasion plan, but Parma's forces had dwindled to 18,000 men, thanks to disease. Still, the Spanish believed they could march into London. The Armada, 130 ships, 19,000 troops set sail, brimming with Catholic zeal and dreams of conquest. What followed was one of history's most dramatic naval showdowns: storms, fire ships, daring English maneuvers, and the eventual scattering of the Armada around Scotland and Ireland. Elizabeth herself rallied her troops at Tilbury with the famous line, "I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." And with that, England stood defiant. Philip II, King of Spain, had a dream: march into London, topple Elizabeth, and restore Catholic glory. But even Philip knew deep down that occupying England was no longer a guaranteed success. So in a secret twist, he authorized Parma, his nephew the Duke of Parma, to whisper sweet compromises: religious tolerance for Catholics in England, in exchange for England staying out of Flanders. Sounds reasonable, right? Except Philip gave Medina Sidonia, the seasick admiral, much simpler orders. Don't fight the English, just pick up Parma's troops and escort them to Dover. And here's where the comedy begins. Parma, sitting in Brussels, couldn't easily send messages to Medina Sidonia in Lisbon. Medina Sidonia assumed Parma would sail out to meet him off the Dutch coast. Parma, meanwhile, knew his puny barges couldn't break through the Anglo-Dutch blockade, so he expected the Armada to come fetch him. Result? Two commanders waiting for each other like awkward teenagers at a dance, each thinking the other would make the first move. Confusion reigned supreme. On May 10, 1588, the Great Armada, 130 ships strong, sailed proudly out of Lisbon harbor. Trumpets blared, prayers were said, and the men shouted, "Viva España!" And then, contrary winds slapped them in the face. The fleet limped back to port like a drunk giant. For 2 weeks they sat, morale dwindling, provisions rotting, sailors grumbling. Finally, by June 17th, they reached Cape Finisterre. Medina Sidonia checked the supplies and discovered, horror, the food and water were spoiled. He ordered a resupply stop. But then sudden gales scattered the fleet like dice across a tavern floor. Some ships were blown as far as the Scilly Isles, alerting the English that something big was coming. Lord Charles Howard, the English admiral, tried a preemptive strike with 100 ships on July 4th, but the winds mocked him too, forcing the English back. By July 23rd, Medina Sidonia had reassembled his battered fleet, only to lose 5 more ships to storms in the Bay of Biscay. The Armada was starting to look less like a divine mission and more like a cursed cruise. On July 30th, the Armada finally appeared off the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. England's beacon system lit up like a medieval alarm clock. Legend says Sir Francis Drake was playing bowls when the warning came. His cheeky reply, "We have time to finish the game and beat the Spaniards too." Apocryphal? Yes, but it perfectly captures the English swagger. They waited until the next morning before sailing out. July 31st, 1588. Medina Sidonia arranged his fleet in a crescent formation, the mighty Lunula. His rear guard was protected by 6 squadrons of trusted commanders. Howard, with 85 nimble English ships, seized the weather gauge. That meant the wind was on his side. English ships were smaller, faster, and had superior cannons that could fire 3 to 4 shots per hour. Spanish cannons? 1 shot per hour. The Spanish infantry was superb, but their strategy was to grapple and board. The English? No thanks, we'll just shoot you from afar. Howard attacked the center, while Drake pounced on Admiral Recalde's squadron. Poor Recalde was left fighting alone with his ship, the San Juan de Portugal. Medina Sidonia rushed in with his flagship, the San Martin, and 7 other galleons. Cannons roared, smoke filled the air, but the battle ended indecisively. The Armada kept sailing east, but Howard kept the weather gauge and pursued. Later that afternoon, tragedy. A gunpowder accident on the San Salvador caused a massive explosion. Over 200 crewmen were killed instantly. Worse still, the ship carried most of the Armada's crew wages. Imagine the sailors' faces when they realized their pay had gone up in smoke. Morale plummeted. Then, as if cursed, another ship, the Rosario, was crippled after a collision. Medina Sidonia had to abandon it. As night fell, Howard ordered Drake to lead the English fleet, guiding them with his stern lantern. Midnight came and Drake's lantern mysteriously went out. The English fleet scattered in the dark, forced to regroup at dawn. Why did Drake extinguish his light? Because he was busy chasing a German merchantman and then capturing the stranded Rosario. Martin Frobisher, his rival, was furious. He accused Drake of hogging the loot. "He thinketh to cozen us out of our share of 15,000 ducats. But we will have our shares, or I will make him spend the best blood in his belly." Ah, the joys of teamwork. Elizabeth's navy was as much about rivalry and treasure as it was about patriotism. By August 2nd, the winds shifted, giving the Armada the weather gauge. Medina Sidonia, disobeying Philip's orders, sought battle. Howard tried to slip past the crescent formation near land, but Sidonia blocked him. Cannons thundered by 9 a.m. in a fierce yet inconclusive clash. Frobisher, leading 6 ships, tried to outflank the Armada from the north. Sidonia dispatched 4 galleasses to stop him, but fate laughed again. The galleasses got trapped in a tidal rip known as Portland Race. Frobisher pounded them mercilessly. The Armada was bleeding, morale shaken, and the English were still snapping at their heels. The stage was set for the next dramatic act. Fire ships at Calais. Picture it, August 2nd, the English and Spanish fleets circling like sharks. On one flank, Drake swoops in with his squadron, gnashing at the southern edge of the Armada. On the other, Howard sails north to back up Frobisher. Suddenly, Medina Sidonia himself charges in aboard his flagship, the mighty San Martin. And what does he do? He gallantly challenges Howard's Ark Royal and 7 other English ships. Talk about guts. Howard's squadron unleashed a storm of fire. 500 shots. The San Martin answered with only 80. It was like a pistol duel, where one guy brings a machine gun. Yet despite the thunderous cannonades, both sides dealt little damage. Why? Because the English fired from long range to avoid boarding, while the Spanish fired back with less accuracy. It was more noise than destruction. When reinforcements arrived from Medina Sidonia, Howard, Drake, and Frobisher wisely disengaged. Better to live to fight another day than get tangled in grappling hooks and Spanish steel. The next day, Drake's revenge spotted a stranded Spanish ship. Aha! Easy loot, he thought. But before he could pounce, Spanish galleasses swooped in like angry hornets, forcing him to back off. The Armada wasn't about to let their stragglers become English trophies. Howard's men spotted 2 big Spanish stragglers near the Isle of Wight, the San Luis and the Santa Ana. Were they genuine stragglers, or bait set by Medina Sidonia to lure the English into a trap? Nobody knew. Privateer John Hawkins attacked, joined by the Ark Royal and another galleon. Medina Sidonia himself brought the San Martin into the fray, leading to a flagship duel. Ark Royal versus San Martin. Cannons roared, splinters flew, but neither ship sank. Meanwhile, Frobisher tried his favorite trick, hugging the shoreline to outflank the Armada. But the wind betrayed him. His triumph became a sitting duck, battered by Spanish fire. Only when the wind picked up again did he limp away to safety. By now, both sides were running low on ammunition. Howard could resupply from England. Medina Sidonia? He was desperately waiting for Parma in Flanders to send gunpowder, but Parma was still tangled in Philip's confusing orders and hadn't even embarked his troops yet. Awkward. The Armada reached the Straits of Dover. Strong currents threatened to sweep them into the North Sea before they could meet Parma. Medina Sidonia anchored at Calais Roads. But then, surprise, Admiral Seymour's squadron arrived from Dover, swelling the English fleet to 140 ships. Medina Sidonia sent frantic messages to Parma. "Where are you?" Parma replied, "I'm ready, sort of. Troops not embarked yet. Philip's orders are confusing. Please hold." The Spanish settled in for an uneasy night. Supplies dwindled, nerves frayed, and the English plotted their next move. Enter the English hellburners. 8 ships stuffed with pitch, tar, and gunpowder, set ablaze and sent drifting straight into the Armada's anchorage. The Spanish panicked. Sailors grappled 2 of the fiery monsters and dragged them ashore. But the other 6, driven by strong winds, barreled into the fleet. In sheer desperation, Spanish crews cut their anchor cables and fled. Ships collided in the chaos, 3 were lost, and the Armada was scattered. Medina Sidonia planned to regroup. But the currents shoved them toward the sandy banks of Flanders. Disaster! The San Martin anchored near Gravelines, rallying 4 galleons. Howard's fleet pounced. His squadron chased Captain Moncada's galleass, the San Lorenzo, which ran aground. Spanish musketeers fought fiercely, inflicting heavy English casualties. Only when Moncada was killed did resistance collapse. The English seized the ship and looted 20,000 ducats. But then came the comedy. The governor of Calais claimed the loot belonged to him. The English robbed his emissaries, and the governor retaliated by firing cannons from his fortress. The boarding parties withdrew, bloody but rich. Meanwhile, the San Martin faced up to 40 English ships. Drake's Revenge was hit 40 times. Frobisher's Triumph and Hawkins' Squadron hammered the flagship with 107 hits. Yet the San Martin held on, reinforced by Spanish officers de Leyva, Recalde, and Oquendo. Just as the tide seemed to turn for Spain, Admiral Seymour struck from the north with devastating broadsides. The San Felipe was shredded, losing 200 men. Its commander, Don Francisco de Toledo, tried to grapple English ships, shouting challenges for hand-to-hand combat. The English, true to form, dodged him, firing from a distance while Spaniards screamed, "Lutheran chickens!" But those chickens packed a punch. The San Mateo was wrecked and beached near Ostend, where Dutch rebels massacred her crew. The San Felipe followed, drifting ashore and lost. Finally, the Maria Juan went down with 275 souls. By 4 p.m., both sides were exhausted. Ammunition gone, food gone, men weary. Then the weather struck. A heavy storm scattered the fleets. The English regrouped. The Armada was blown northeast out of the Channel. By the end of the Battle of Gravelines, the Armada had lost 3 confirmed ships, plus auxiliaries. Casualties, 1,000 dead, 800 captured. English losses? Minimal, except for the bloody fight over the San Lorenzo. Tactically, the Spanish defeat wasn't total. But strategically, the Armada was broken, scattered, and forced into retreat. The dream of conquering England was slipping away like sand through Philip's fingers. On a strategic level, Lord Charles Howard had already won. He didn't need to sink every Spanish ship. He just needed to shove them into the North Sea and block their rendezvous with Parma's Army of Flanders. Mission accomplished. Parma's troops sat waiting, twiddling their thumbs, while the Armada drifted further and further away. Howard had achieved the golden rule of naval warfare: deny the enemy their objective. On August 9th, Medina Sidonia regrouped his scattered fleet. He took stock of the situation and realized, ammunition? Almost gone. Supplies spoiled. Wind, a cruel southwesterly pushing them further north. English, snapping at their heels like hungry wolves. Attempting another rendezvous with Parma? Impossible. The only option left was to sail north, circumnavigate the British Isles, and pray to limp back to Spain. Meanwhile, Howard himself was nearly out of shot and powder, but he wasn't about to let the Armada off easy. He ordered his fleet to keep chasing them all the way to the Firth of Forth on the Scottish coast. Seymour's fleet returned to Dover to guard against any sneaky move from Parma. Why? Because even though the Armada was fleeing, Philip's orders were unpredictable, and Howard wasn't about to risk Parma suddenly slipping across the Channel with reinforcements. Better safe than sorry. By August 20th, the Armada cleared Scotland and entered the Atlantic. And this is when the true horror began. No English cannons were needed now. The weather became England's greatest ally. Supplies were rotten. Men were starving. Storms battered the fleet day after day. Ships were scattered, broken, and tossed like toys in a bathtub. The Invincible Armada was being dismantled by Mother Nature herself. By mid-September, desperate Spanish captains tried to moor along the western coast of Ireland. Bad idea. The Irish coastline was a graveyard waiting to happen. Over 2 weeks, 28 ships crashed against the rocks. The sea claimed more victories than Howard's cannons ever did. Survivors staggered ashore, only to be rounded up and executed by English authorities. For the Spanish sailors, Ireland was less a refuge and more a death trap. On September 21st, Medina Sidonia finally limped back to Corunna. In the following weeks, the shattered remnants of the Armada trickled home. The tally was catastrophic: 44 ships lost, including some of Spain's finest war galleons, 11,000 men dead, most not from battle but from disease and starvation during the voyage. By contrast, Howard's fleet had lost not a single ship in combat. Only about 100 men fell in battle. Disease did claim around 3,000 English sailors, but their navy remained intact, ready to fight again. The Spanish dream of conquering England had been shattered. The Invincible Armada was now the Invisible Armada, scattered across the seas. England emerged triumphant, its navy bloodied, but still fighting fit. And the English weren't done yet. In April 1589, Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norris led the English counter-armada against Corunna. England was ready to strike back, turning defense into offense. So, what do we have? Spain. 44 ships gone, 11,000 men dead, humiliated by storms and starvation. England, fleet intact, only 100 combat deaths, morale soaring. The defeat of the Spanish Armada wasn't just a battle, it was a symbol. A moment when Elizabethan England stood tall, when the seas themselves seemed to fight for the Protestant Queen. The Armada had set out to conquer England in 8 days. Instead, it took months to crawl home, broken and beaten. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more epic history adventures. Every follow helps build and grow this channel. See you in the next one.